webinar and reach out to those who were not able to attend the conference. We have 5 presenters today, and each of us are conducting very exciting research project on makerspaces from different institutions. So I am Dr. Kyungwon Koh, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma, and I'll be moderating the webinar, and I'm going to introduce each presenter when they present their work. So let's begin with a definition of makerspaces. A makerspace is a place for community members to engage in creative making activities in a range of domains, offering access to technologies and social opportunities with other makers. So each makerspace is different and unique in size, location, participants, and programs, but community engagement is the key to success for all makerspaces. And several makerspaces are currently practicing innovative approaches to engage in their communities. Also, makerspaces are in different places like a community center, school, or museums. And today we'll be focusing on makerspaces in libraries. The panel proposes the following overarching questions today concerning social responsibilities of library makerspaces, how to engage community effectively, implications for LIS educators regarding community engagement and social responsibilities of library makerspaces. So the 5 research projects in this webinar will address those questions, and the presentations will explore how makerspaces meet the needs of community members regardless of location through mobile makerspaces, methods for reaching out and supporting underserved populations, including court-involved teens, as well as the development of young people's social responsibilities and critical technical practices. And the panel also includes suggestions for LIS educators regarding competencies for makerspace professionals that must be cultivated during LIS higher education. So each panelist will present about 10 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A and discussion time at the end of the webinar. Now let me introduce our first presenter, Dr. Heather Moorefield-Lang from the University of South Carolina. She'll be talking about mobile makerspaces. So welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koh. Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Moorefield-Lang, and I am speaking to you from my desk at the University of South Carolina in famously hot Columbia, South Carolina. And for everyone who'd like to reach out or become a new Twitter friend or check out my website, that is all of my email, Twitter information, website information, and I also have a YouTube video where I introduce new technology tools and how they can be used in curriculum and instruction. And I do a lot of work in K through 12 training, and I used to be a K through 12 librarian before I went into academia. So go ahead and move to the next slide. So I'm going to be talking to you about mobile makerspaces. And this all occurred, you can move to the next one, focusing on our 3 questions. What social responsibilities do makerspaces in a library have to their community? And what are some of the effective ways makerspaces currently practice to engage community? And also looking at what should LIS educators and researchers do to promote community engagement and social responsibility in and through library makerspaces. But then I also had 3 questions of my own. And my specific questions looked at what happens when the brick and mortar library space isn't enough. when you want to look at your community? What happens when the libraries branch out into the community, moving away from their actual brick and mortar locations? And how can libraries reach the community outside of their library space? And these were some of the areas that I have been looking at. I've been doing Makerspace research around 4 years, pushing into 5 years now, and I've been looking at various areas, to be quite honest. I've been doing a wide range of research, and some of the different areas that I've been looking into, I started out with Makerspace comparisons, looking at Makerspaces in school libraries, academic libraries, public libraries. That was some of my earlier work. And then I started looking at school libraries specifically, and then I started moving into, and each piece, kind of like pulling a thread from a sweater, led to each level of the next piece that I did. I did a real page turner of a piece where I looked at the rules and the navigation of almost the policies for Makerspaces, because a lot of people were interested in that but hadn't written about it. And that's where a lot of Makerspace research kind of goes, because it seems there's a lot of research out there, but in reality there's not. And so when it came to mobile making, I had a library high-tech piece on mobile makerspaces. We had an entire maker dedicated issue about mobile making, mobile makerspaces, and mobile making on the go. Had a very specific article on the longest title in the free world, I felt, When Makerspaces Go Mobile, case studies on transportable maker locations. Yes, that's the next one. And then I had one that was a little more fun for school library connections, simply called Making on the Move. And so this was one specifically about school libraries and mobile makerspaces, when you pick up your makerspace and take it to your clients, take it to your patrons. And that's what I'm speaking about today during our presentation, specifically where you pick up your makerspace and you move it to the locations of where your patrons are at. Some of my future research, I'm actually looking at makerspaces and accessibility, and how we can make our makerspaces accessible, and how makerspaces work towards our differently abled and are accessible for our clients. I also have recently looked at training in makerspaces and how we teach maker librarians. So just some of the different stuff that I'm either kicking around or already doing. So let's take a look at some of the mobile makerspaces that are out there. Here are a few different examples that I will talk about in my last 4 minutes. I will show you some of the really sassy ones that are out there, that are kind of pie in the sky. I start with the pie in the sky ones, and then I bring us down to what our mere mortals, us mere muggles can have, and that we can more likely afford for our libraries. One of my favorites, this is the Frisk Lab. This was actually the first mobile Fab Lab available in Europe. And if you think of a large, this is much more than a taco truck, but if you think of a mobile truck that takes Fab Labs, 3D printers, laser cutters, all different types of technology all over Europe. Their first year out, they actually visited 8 different countries and 10 different locations, and it was kind of like making and Fab Labs and hacking all across Europe. I really just wanted to be a roadie on their tour, to be quite honest. And this was the ability to be able to, in their particular areas, and this is one of the reasons why people go mobile, because not everyone could come to them. They were very much a rural library, a rural situation, so they were going to take all of their making out to schools, communities, because in Europe, not all schools have libraries, so they depend upon community libraries. Well, then not all communities have libraries, and so they were able to offer these options. Let me show you another one. This is the Spark Truck. Spark Truck is actually not readily available for just specifically libraries. I mean, it's readily available, but it's not specifically for libraries. This is very much a maker roadie truck. They work with literacy specifically, and they actually have everything loaded in the truck, and they run all across the U.S., so you can actually book them to come to your library. I actually talked to the Chicago Public Library, and they had actually had the Spark Truck come and visit them. They take everything in the truck, and they have low-tech, high-tech, and everything in between, and then they load everything off, put everything out in parking lots and parks, and they have everything from literacy and writing workshops to laser cutting and robots and everything in between, and then they tie a lot of it to writing and literacy and books and all different types of stuff, and they actually travel all over the U.S. They did it wasn't all 50 states, but I think it was 35 out of 50 states during one summer. So if you're ever looking for an opportunity to travel with making, you can join the Spark Truck. So that's one, and there's more than one out there, Spark Truck. This has become quite the movement, as it were, for a play on words. So here's another one. This is my idea of what another idea could be for mobile making. This is actually here in Richland County where I live. This is actually a bike mobile for books, but making could very easily be done this way as well. Downtown, it's a whole lot easier to get around with a bicycle, and so you could very easily have this for parks, activities, near our state capitol, and this has, as I said, books in it, but you could very easily have small making activities with this as well. And then my last slide that I'm sharing with you today, I have one more minute, is a very easy way to share making. I had a young lady who took one of her old book carts. She tricked it out in a true maker sense and totally made her own maker mobile cart. And so this is much more what I see people doing now. I either have them on, I see people doing maker carts, maker fleets, maker boxes, and you can have small shoe boxes where you can check out maker activities, up to maker totes where you can have maker classroom activities, carts where you can move them all around to classroom to classroom to classroom. This was an entire maker activity, so she can go into the classrooms and do different maker activities. I actually travel with professional development making from system to system to system in my state. And then I actually have the state library here in my county, and they have portable maker kits that you can check out, try out maker activities, and see which types of technology work for you. And I think that's the end of my slides, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct? Nope, I have one more. And here are two other examples. Over on the right side of the screen, that's one of the examples of the maker parties in a box where you can check out small maker activities. And then on the left side of the screen is an example of the maker fleet. And each one of those, instead of investing the money in the library, you can check out a librarian to go with it. One of those carts is for knitting, one is for Sphero small coding robots, one's for 3D printing, so on and so forth, and they're investing in each fleet cart is available for one per classroom. And so that way the librarian can travel with the cart, teacher can take a cart, so on and so forth. And so there's lots of different ways that you can make your making mobile, anywhere from packing it up in a Hyundai or getting yourself a big old taco truck. There's all different ways you can do it, but you're taking those activities out to your public to where they are as opposed to them coming to us. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of our presentation today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moorefield-Lang. Again, we'll receive questions at the end of the webinar. And the next presenter is Dr. Rebekah Willett from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So she'll be presenting Makerspaces programming with court-involved kids.
Hi, everyone. This is Rebekah from Wisconsin. If I could have the next slide, please. I'll be talking about Madison Public Library's Bubbler, which is a maker program that runs across Madison's 9 public libraries and also goes into neighborhood community spaces. The Bubbler activities are funded partly by an IMLS grant that is just wrapping up, and also through smaller grants from the University of Wisconsin focusing specifically on court-involved teens in a program we call Making Justice. So firstly, I'll just describe what Bubbler is. And I have 5 slides that Kyungwon, if you could just go through fairly quickly. It's very diverse in terms of what it offers for programs. There is a dedicated room in the Central Library that has an artist in residence program. Next. And the Central Library also has a media lab with high-spec software, a sound studio, a green screen, and so on. Next. There are portable kits that go around to the different libraries. They have a van that takes these kits around. This is the circuit blocks kit. Next. And the program extends into community spaces such as the Juvenile Detention Center. This is our artist in residence working in the detention center. Next. And these are our portable animation stations, which are very popular for school programming, for making book trailers. So the Bubbler also covers adult programming, events, art exhibitions. I won't be talking about those because I'm going to focus on the Making Justice program. This program is run by one teen services librarian, Jesse View. He works in these three areas, the JDC, the detention center that is, a neighborhood intervention program, and a shelter home. He has artists in residence who work specifically in these spaces, as well as guest artists, and you'll be seeing he has a collaboration with a photography artist on campus. Okay, next. So addressing our first question about social responsibilities, this is an image of a makerspace that is not in a public library but aligns with stereotypes of the maker movement more broadly. So in this stereotype, the maker movement is about white men in their 20s and 30s tinkering with electronics. And of course, there's some truth in the stereotype. The Bubbler developed on the premise that elements from this larger maker movement could align with ideals of public libraries. So also in this image that you see, there might be communities of practice that are being enacted and developed. It might be providing access to tools or the means of production. DIY aesthetic is key to these kinds of spaces. Next slide, please. So public libraries have long embraced this DIY spirit through things like zine collections. They have long been spaces to encourage communities of practice around making, like knitting circles that have been in existence for decades in public libraries. And they have long lended tools for production. So instead of a space for white men in their 20s and 30s working with electronics, public library makerspaces can look different. And that was one of the goals of the Bubbler. Next, please. But models of makerspaces need to be altered and expanded in order to provide potentially more democratic spaces for making in communities. So in our research, librarians discuss the Bubblers as serving the needs of their local community. So for the Bubbler Teen Services librarian, this meant working really hard toward creating greater diversity in his participant base, diverse in terms of ethnicity and socioeconomic status and relationship with the public library. So the first thing he did was stopped offering drop-in programs at the library, which were attracting the usual super users. And instead he connected with community organizations where there were teens who were coming already and who were not connected with the library. Second, he had to find artists and makers who came from similar backgrounds as the teens he was working with in order to best meet the needs of these teens. And third, he needed to decide what met these teens' needs in terms of program content. Next slide, please. So I'll show you a few examples, and please also visit the website. There are examples, there are wraps on the website, images on the website that show you greater diversity than what I can portray here. So Rap Sesh is one of our artists that works with the court-involved teens. We have a local beatbox and rap musician who works with the teens. Next slide, please. We have a local mural artist. The Juvenile Detention Center is a lot more colorful after teens have been working with our mural artists. Next slide, please. This is the last summer's photography exhibit. The photography artists on campus worked with teens to create life-size portraits, and these were displayed in the entrance to the Central Library. And you can see the display was called the Direct Message, and this is one of the statements from one of the teens about the exhibit. Next slide, please. So our second question are about effective ways that they engage community. So what we found is that partnering with organizations to connect with non-traditional library users was one of the key aims of the Bubbler program. Second, we found that one of the ways we could help is trying to find experts from the community, and really it takes a lot of time to find these people. But to think broadly about who we're calling experts. So we brought in activists, a DJ from a community radio station, a Black hairdresser, and members of Black fraternities and sororities on campus. Third, you saw that bringing programs into other spaces were another way of engaging community. And finally, I'm really thinking about the community needs. So so one of the mantras of for all Madison Public Library program is that there's no one-size-fits-all program. And this has been part of the discussions amongst the Bubbler staff. So every time a program is being offered, there are questions about what works or what might work in that community space, what adjustments need to be made, or for Making Justice, what do these teams need? What will work with these teams in this setting? So next slide, please. One of the most successful Artist in Residence program was a sewing artist. And she helped the teens make these string bags. It was a bit of, we call this the surprise of sewing. It was a bit of surprise for us, but she did her research, the seamstress. She talked with the educator and found that teens really appreciated having something soft and comforting in their lives, something that they could make for a loved one, something that they could keep their belongings in. These are kids from the shelter. Next slide, please. And she also made pillows with them. So that was one of a really successful programs that built on the needs and the specific context of those kids. Okay, and the final slide, the final question we have is about implications for LIS educators. So as a researcher, I've analyzed rhetoric around public library makerspace programs. I've raised questions about celebratory approaches, about how particular ideas are being constructed, and so on. So I think one thing that we can do as researchers is to ask this question. Are public library makerspaces promoting community engagement? Which communities are we talking about here? What kinds of engagement is being promoted? And second, what I've learned from working with Madison Public Library is to think hard about programming. So this build it and they will come model is really not appropriate for public libraries. Thinking that we're the experts in particular areas or librarians are particular experts in areas and then offering programs based on that expertise is also problematic. So I've been asking my students to think about and look for evidence in their experiences in libraries about some key questions about programming. So how does the library know the needs of their communities? Are they just assuming what communities need, what specific needs of communities are? How are the designs of different programs aiming to meet those needs? And then how do we know that those needs are being met? So those are just a few questions for further discussion. I look forward to your questions later in the conference panel. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Willett. So next, we have Dr. Leanne Bowler from the University of Pittsburgh. So Dr. Bowler will be presenting about Library Makerspace as a place for community engagement, social responsibility, and the development of critical technical practices. Thank you, Dr. Bowler.
Hi, thank you, Kwan Young. And hello to everyone else. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us today. Today I'm going to talk to you about the Mindful Maker Project. This is a research project that looked at makerspaces as places for community engagement, social responsibility, and principally the development of critical technical practices. And very specifically, it was looking at the technique of dialogic reasoning. So critical technical practice is related to critical computing and involves thinking and acting critically, metacognitively, and with a deep sense of self-awareness and social responsibility vis-a-vis our relationship with the technologies and media that we create and use. And this study explored the nature of dialectic reasoning as a scaffold for the development of these critical and metacognitive ways of thinking in makerspaces for youth. And so it asked the principal question, and I'm going to talk to you about two phases of the study and sort of end up with going into the third phase. But overall, the driving question is, how might we help young people become critical makers? And I guess a possible answer, maybe call it a hypothesis, is through the guided conversation and the humble question prompt. The next slide, please. The humble question prompt. This is a social cultural tool. These questions are framed as dialogic inquiry, which is also known as the Socratic method. And in the Socratic method, we use skillful questioning. It comes from a teacher, an expert, in the case of a makerspace, a mentor. And this questioning can help learners analyze their own thinking processes, see connections, build new understanding, and support a disposition towards mindful and critical technical practice. And these questions can be metacognitive. And with practice and modeling, learners, young makers, may ask these questions of themselves without the direct intervention of an expert. So scaffolding is important. Next, please. And question techniques are already familiar to librarians. We know in the reference interview, it's questions. One reference interview technique is neutral questioning, where sense-making questions are used to get at situation gaps in uses by asking questions like, what are you trying to understand? How will you use this information? Children's librarians have been using dialogic reading and storytelling for a very long time. Dialogic reading is an early literacy practice where adults ask children simple, open-ended questions and follow up with expanded questions. As I've said, we've been training children's librarians in how to do this for many years. And of course, dialogic reading is itself modeled on reciprocal teaching, a teaching method to support reading comprehension and metacognition, and many teachers get training in that. The next slide, please. So the humble question prompt is particularly suited to the non-structured, informal learning environment of many, if not most, public libraries. It's practical, portable, low-tech, and cheap and cheerful. But I argue that librarians still need training in dialectic reasoning as a technique for interacting with young people. And this lines up with David Lank's idea of the library as conversation and Wayne Weigard's thesis in his new book on the American Library, where he argues for the need to move beyond a focus on information access and refocus our training in LIS on the sociality of the library, the conversations and interpersonal relationships. Next slide, please. So the Mindful Maker Research Project. In phase one, we asked this general question: what are the core questions that makers and the mentors who guide them should ask, or can ask more appropriately? My research colleague and I hung out in Makerspaces for several months and captured many of the questions that mentors and teens ask. We then grouped these questions into broader themes and created an interpretive framework. And in a third phase of analysis, we used the interpretive categories to inform the generation of 8 activation questions that reflect, we hope, both the authentic world of youth makers and the wisdom of mentors in natural language, so as to encourage direct application in makerspaces. And here you have an image of a poster that was a result of that phase of the study, and you can access it at the website listed here. I'm not going to go into the detail about these questions. There was an article last year in Library and Information Science Research if you want to explore the roots and meanings of these questions a little more deeply. Next slide, please. So these are the 8 core questions, and as I say, they're in the article in LISR. Next slide, please. So then we moved into phase 2, which was the goal was to take these Mindful Maker question prompts back into the field and explore how they are experienced by library staff and teens, specifically in support of critical technical practice. And I'm going to talk to you, present some, very briefly, some of the results, unpublished results from phase 2. Starting on the next slide. And we saw that there's, as you know, a lot of unstructured learning happens in libraries, but to effectively use these question prompts, there needs to be some level of intentionality. That was the piece that seemed to be missing in terms of, inserting the questions into practice. The organic nature of public library engagement means that meaningful questions arise within the context of an activity. And so the library mentors, librarians have to learn how to ask and answer questions on the fly, but also with intentionality. And so it's actually a really complex interaction. So how can they do this? One way is to create a plan that makes the questions an organic part of the process. So, when planning actual activities, a librarian or the mentor would typically write down the list of materials and might do a very simple step-by-step set of guidelines. And it's at that point where they might actually insert some questions to ask along the way so that you start it, bury it into the design. And I want to at this point sort of push back against some of the assumptions that we saw amongst librarians in the field. And the idea that acting with intentionality does not mean you are turning the experience into like a school experience. I know public libraries do not want their activities to look like a school. And aiming for interest-driven learning experiences doesn't mean we can't plan for an outcome like critical technical practice. Next slide, please. But many activities in library makerspaces are actually not planned. So makerspaces are grounded on the principles of connected learning, which argue that interest-driven learning outside of school involves 3 types of interactions: hanging out, messing around, and geeking out. And in our research, we saw a lot of hanging out and messing about, just sitting at tables, surfing the web, playing in online games with friends, messing around with Tinkercad or any other application. But I think we need to see of hanging out and messing about as the exact place for these kinds of casual conversations and use of question prompts by mentors. So we need to embrace the hanging out and learn to work within the unstructured environment of informal learning. And think of hanging out with teens as a wonderful affordance, a feature, not a bug. Next slide, please. So, and finally, although I said I wouldn't go through each of the 8 questions, I did want to highlight this particular question: how will my creation affect other people? Now, one of the criticisms of the maker movement as it's currently unfolding is that it seems to instrumentalize learning. In other words, learning not for the sake of growth and pleasure, but rather to create a good technician, a good engineer, and a good entrepreneur, rather than someone who's simply a good citizen. Arguably, this is, maybe it's an anti-community stance. If not anti, it's definitely not focused on community. And one pushback to this instrumentalized version of makerspace learning is to simply ask this question: how will my creation affect other people? And we saw when this question was asked that there were some really interesting conversations circling around politics and justice of technology in makerspaces. So ask this question to get young people to step outside of themselves and think about their communities. And next slide, please. So to wrap up, I just wanted to raise a few points about implications for teaching in LAS, although I know June and Kwon Young will discuss this further in their presentation. But in the specific context of this, the research question here, I just wanted to say that future teen and children's librarians really need to learn how to encourage dialogue through questioning, how to use question prompts in adaptive ways, but also intentional ways, and ways that still stay true to the informal teen-centered learning in libraries. Now, this speaks to a broader understanding about the pedagogy of informal learning, and I really feel that librarians who are going to work with teens and children in makerspaces, children's libraries, need to understand this pedagogy of informal learning, which is a distinct kind of pedagogy. And it's contrary to popular belief. It really is okay to plan for an outcome in informal learning. It's just you have to think in more constructivist terms. And also I'd like to argue that our students need a lot more observation and practice through their MLIS studies in these kinds of dialogue and conversations and use of questioning techniques. And then finally, in the next phase of my research in this area, I'm going to be exploring a professional facilitation model situated in the library makerspace context. And if you want to get a taste of what that might look like, there's a website called Simple Interactions that you can look at. And finally, I always say thank you to the young people and the mentors who participated in this study, because their contributions are invaluable. Thank you very much. And I gratefully acknowledge the support of the Elise Research Grant and Sprout Fund Remake Learning Fellowship to support these two studies. And finally, if you would like to download the poster or just go check out the website, on the next slide, it has the website link, and also please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or comments. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bowler. So our last presentation is about research conducted by Dr. June Abbas and myself, and we both are from the University of Oklahoma. So we've been researching about competencies needed by professionals working in library and museum makerspaces. And I'll let Dr. Abbas tell you more about the project.
Thank you, Kyungwon. It's a real pleasure to talk with you today about the study that Dr. Koh and I have been conducting about competencies needed for information professionals who work or manage makerspaces or learning labs in either libraries or museums. We will address research question number 3, what should LAS educators and researchers do to promote community engagement and social responsibility in and through library makerspaces in this presentation. Now I'm figuring out how to do this slide. Here we go. Okay. Today I'm going to present our findings from phase 2 of the study. Our earlier study has been published in other journals, so we will not discuss the findings of phase 1 today. In phase 2, we conducted an online survey with the objective of identifying competencies required for the successful performance of professionals who work in emerging learning spaces in libraries and museums. We hope to capture the experiences and perceptions of professionals who work in these environments. Along with competencies, we also asked participants about educational preparation for their current position. We'll focus the presentation today on the competencies needed and more specifically those related to community engagement. Let's just talk briefly about the basic demographics. Of the participants, 44 who completed this survey were from libraries and 12 were from museums. We had a representation of 27 different states in our sample. Just a brief snapshot of the demographics. The majority of the participants were, as I said, librarians, but also we had participants from museums. They had worked in museums or libraries between 4 to 9 years, and the majority had worked with teens between 1 to 3 years, followed by 4 to 9 years. 75% of the sample had a master's degree in LAS, but there are other degrees which varied greatly. The majority age was between 26 and 44 years. 73% were female and 82% of the participants were white. Please bear in mind this is the sample of our study and does not necessarily represent the demographics of all professionals working in makerspaces and learning labs. In our study, we adopted McNeil and Geiske's definition for competencies, which are defined as the skills, technical knowledge, and personal attributes that contribute to an individual's success in a particular position. We reviewed the library and other professional literature related to competencies and felt this definition best fit the goal of our study. Now let's talk just briefly about some of our findings and what we learned from the participants. This chart shows first the top ranked competencies for all participants and then breaks these out by libraries and museums. For all participants, technology, or the ability to work with technology, having an interest in or being comfortable with technology, being able to teach and learn technology, or even possessing basic skills, was ranked first as the competency most often mentioned by all participants, as well as in libraries. Ranking second was teaching, the ability to design and facilitate informal learning, the ability to design instruction or to facilitate informal learning, such as being able to involve others in the learning process or to guide projects without doing them. Number three was learning, or the participant's ability to learn, or having the willingness or enthusiasm for learning. Also under this competency is the ability to be self-directed or a lifelong learner, to know how to learn, or to possess the ability to learn technology. Fourth was community advocacy and partnership, or knowing how to develop relationships with community partners, doing marketing, community advocacy, public relations, networking, and outreach. And fifth ranked by all participants was the ability to be flexible or adaptable to go with the flow. Sixth was user services, the ability to understand and work with diverse user groups, understanding of users, awareness of the needs of your patron or your audience. If we look at the responses from libraries, there is definitely some overlap, and the order is slightly different, as are the competencies for museum professionals. For example, while teaching is still one of the top desired competencies, as is community advocacy, networking, and building partnerships, technology is fourth mentioned competency in both, or in museums. Excuse me. What is also interesting about the desired competencies for museum participants is that the understanding of their diverse users or user services is higher than for all participants and for libraries. When we look at the library data specifically, we can see that community advocacy, while it's fourth for all, and for libraries, for all as well as libraries, and third for museums, there's certain language that's really specific to libraries and their need to have competency in this area. For example, we see words like how to develop relationships with community partners, community involvement, self-promotion, being a community-oriented person. If we look at the data for museums, it's very similar, such as collaborating with other community organizations or the ability to connect with all kinds of people. We also asked participants about their top 5 or top 3 job responsibilities. All participants reported the top 5 as management, teaching and developing programming, user services, advocacy and partnership, collection development, and research. There's definitely some overlap across the categories, with management either being the most often or second most often reported job responsibility. It is important to note that community advocacy is one of the top 5 job responsibilities for each category. If we look at the data for libraries about community advocacy, we see the phrases such as outreach, engaging community partners, community and school engagement, or facilitating connections. And if we look at the museum data, we can see phrases such as guest engagement, education outreach, and fundraising. We also asked participants if they've ever been called upon to do something that they did or didn't feel prepared to do. The majority of all respondents, or 73%, responded yes, that they had been called upon to do something they didn't feel prepared for. As a follow-up, we asked which areas that they felt less prepared for. New technologies and using making tools was at the top of this list. Advocacy was mentioned, but only by 18%, or 7 participants, showing that advocacy or advocating for the Makerspace or Learning Lab was an area the majority of participants felt prepared for. When asked about the relevance or non-relevance of their completed or current degree program in higher education, 33 participants reported their education was somewhat relevant, followed by 8 who said it was relevant, 6 reporting it was very relevant, and another 6 who said it was not relevant at all. Digging a bit deeper into this issue, we asked participants what they found relevant or not relevant in their program. 52 of all respondents to this question reported what was taught and relevant included technical skills or computer knowledge, learning technical tools for makerspaces, user services, knowledge of community needs, understanding youth or child development. Problem solving was also something they felt was taught, as well as communication skills and tools. And lastly, learning how to develop programs. However, you will notice there is some overlap. For example, while 6 participants reported that technical skills and learning the specific technology of makerspaces was taught, 15 others reported these skills were not taught. The responses in this category indicated this was due to there being no makerspaces at the time that they graduated, or no makerspaces classes in their more recent program. Also, while 2 participants reported that developing programs in general was taught, 4 others reported developing programs in makerspaces was not taught in their program. Only 2 participants reported that advocacy and developing partnerships was not taught in their program. So you can see, if you're looking at the findings, there are specific implications for education that become pretty apparent. And I've just listed a few of them on the slides here. For example, information professionals in makerspaces and learning labs in both libraries and museums felt that the courses they took in higher education did not teach topics that were relevant for working in a makerspace or a learning lab. The courses should include more on maker technologies of all types, such as those wonderful pictures that we saw from Heather and other presentations earlier. The courses should include maker technologies such as 3D printers and coding, but also other technologies that are used in makerspaces like sewing and audio and video recording. LIS courses should incorporate more practical real-world experiences, such as internships, into the curriculum when appropriate. And the unique skills for managing a makerspace or a learning lab also should be emphasized, such as advocacy and partnership building with stakeholders and mentors. Thank you very much for your time today, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas, and all presenters for very informative and enlightening presentations. Now, I'd like to open the floor to any questions or comments you might have, and you can use the chat box to type your questions or comments. And if you want, please direct your questions to a specific presenter. So you can use the chat box, and I'll read the questions aloud. Yeah, at this point, we are inviting the attendees to make any comments or questions.
Can the presenters ask each other questions?
Sure, why not? Because we're not getting any questions from participants or from our attendees.
Well, and they could be, forming a question, but, as opposed to me hearing the Jeopardy tune in my head, hey, we got some questions in the box. We have 3 so far.
You do? So we're not seeing the questions.
Okay, this is Andrew Estep, the Executive Director of Release. I'm going to go ahead and read the first question from, we have one that says, for Dr. Willett, what was that animation technology that you showed?
Hi. So these are we call them animation studios, and it's actually it's a way of holding an iPad. So the animation software is on the iPad, and it's just I forget the name. It's just a stop motion program. But the really cool thing is the studio. So it holds the iPad above a whiteboard, and then you can change the position of the iPad. But it allows you to write on the whiteboard, to draw like a bouncing ball going across the whiteboard. It allows you to put a background on because you can kind of flip the iPad up in different ways. So it's yeah. So I hope that answers the question.
So the other two are actually not questions but comments. One that this was very interesting, important implications for LIS education as we go forward. And the other was no questions, but this is really exciting work and I appreciate all sharing it.
Thank you. Or thumbs up, but you can't see that.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to ask Rebekah what some of their upcoming projects are, because I know they've always got something going on. I check out Bubbler on Twitter all the time, and they've always got some new project or
it's hard
party or something something happening.
Ask me at the end of the day, because that's where I'm going next.
So close.
Yeah, it is really hard to keep up. They always have something. They're gearing up for a summer programming. We're working hard on thinking about outcomes some more. That's been part of our big project, is thinking of ways for the facilitators to be able to grab some, one way we've been framing it, the aha moments versus the ta-da moments.
Sure.
So trying to analyze what what we count as exploration, what that looks like. So building on some of the work that has been done in the field already, but applying it specifically to these kind of mobile spaces. Yeah, they're working really closely with schools. They got a Google grant to work with schools to do some Kickstarter fundraising to start makerspaces in schools. So that's the next big thing that Bubbler is involved in. They did some training with librarians and teachers and a whole range of schools who applied to work with them and were successful in their application. So a charter school for at-risk teens who really want to just spend as much funding as they can on bringing artists in to work with the kids, through to more traditional have a space in the existing library where kids can come and make. So that'll be the kind of next venture, I think.
That's awesome. Congratulations to them. And you.
Thanks.
Yeah, now I can see the questions from attendees. This is questions from Heather. So I have a question about mobile makerspaces in schools. It sounds really cool. And how exactly does that work? Are librarians leading this service?
It depends, so many things, it depends. The mobile maker fleet, that was actually the third to last slide where they were all lined up down the hallway, that was actually led by the principal, Brad Gustafson, but of course the librarian was heavily involved. You always have to have the buy-in with any, especially in schools. You can't have a principal who's just like, I'm 100% behind Makerspaces, and a school librarian going, I don't want to do this at all, and vice versa. You can, it works a little bit better if the librarian is 100% behind doing it, and he or she can typically pull more people in or at least sell it. But if you don't have a school librarian and you want to have a school library makerspace and there's no buy-in from the school librarian, I've seen what happens when librarians don't want to do the makerspaces. There's no backing behind it. It's like any other type of program. And so I've seen a lot of different people do it a lot of different ways. Typically, the librarian is the one who comes up with it, and then they decide how they want to do it in a variety of ways. They start it small. They might start with the small boxes. The shoe boxes were actually the Frisk Lab. The Frisk Lab wanted to do something in their libraries where their patrons could come in and check out their own activity. And then once you've done maker party in a box number 1, well, I've already done that one. And it might have had a doodler pin in it, or it had, a low-tech item where you could build straw bees or sticklets or kiva planks or whatever, something small. And then you've already done number 1. Well, then you can move on to party in a box number 2. Number 3, they might have had 20. But lots of people don't like that because it's only for 1 or 2 students or patrons. And so now folks have moved on to the bigger tubs. And that's a fairly low-cost thing. You can get a tub, and they don't take up too much space. So folks will have like a Lego tub or a Sphero tub. And they don't take much cost either. Spheros are kind of expensive. Legos, they're not too bad. You can have strawberries. You can have, other things that aren't as, I have Make-Dos and Mr. McGroovies. I have a very small office, so I can only have so much stuff in here, but I have a collection of items that you can take. For instance, the State Library, where folks could check out items, that was just a kit. They started with 2. And now it's grown in number due to popularity. And so the answer, as my statistics professor once told me, it depends. But it typically it gets started with the librarian, but in some situations it's the person with the money, which tends to be the administrator. Sorry for the long answer.
Thank you, Dr. Moorefield-Lang,
Sure.
for the detailed answers. We have 1 minute left, so I would like to invite the attendees, if they have any further questions or thoughts, please feel free to contact any of us. And thank you very much for attending this webinar, and you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your semester, everybody.
You too.